The Sparrowhawk drifted quietly in the cold black of space, circling the dead moon of Seraph 4. Its metal hull was scarred and rusting, paint faded, weapons offline. Once a proud warship of the Federation's defense fleet, it now hung like a forgotten relic, a grave marker of a war long past and nearly lost. Inside the ship, the lights flickered weakly. Life support was minimal, gravity unstable in certain corridors. Only one person lived there now. Commander Alara Miles sat in the dim glow of the command deck, her boots resting on an old console that no longer lit up. A tangle of cables and parts surrounded her. She was working on a broken power relay, her fingers stained with grease. Her short, dark hair was tied back, and the sharp line of her jaw showed a hint of tension, even in the quiet. Alara was 34, a former Federation officer who had once commanded a patrol wing on the border. She had made one mistake, refusing a direct order that would have led to the deaths of hundreds of civilians on a neutral colony. The court-martial that followed had stripped her of rank, duty, and reputation. She had vanished from public record after that, choosing exile over argument. She had been in Aurelius Delta for nearly 3 years, salvaging old tech from derelict ships and abandoned satellites. Most days were silent. No transmissions, no traffic, no visitors. Just the sound of her own breathing and the soft hum of the ship's tired systems. Today, something was different. The console in front of her buzzed, then flashed with a red alert, brief, almost uncertain. She sat up straight, her eyes narrowing. A signal was being picked up, low power, tight band transmission. Not Federation, not civilian. It was coded, layered in pulses too precise to be random. Alara keyed the signal through her decryptor. It wasn't broadcasting to her, it was bouncing through the system like a sonar ping, scanning, searching. She checked the ship's passive radar. At first, there was nothing but background radiation and space dust. But then, there it was. A faint blip. Too fast to be a cargo hauler. Too quiet to be Federation. Her heart began to race. She leaned in closer, rerouted the long-range scanner through the backup grid, and waited. The signal pinged again, closer now. She stood and walked quickly to the nearby control node, powering up the old recon satellite she had rebuilt last month. Its sensors fed directly into the Sparrowhawk system. The satellite's lens rotated. For a moment, static. Then, a shape appeared. A long, dark vessel. Sleek, curved, and quiet. No clear markings. No transponder. Alara stared. Her breath caught in her throat. Varnak. She hadn't seen a Varnak ship since the Battle of Archon Ridge 6 years ago. Their ships didn't travel alone. If there was one, more would follow. She turned back to the console and ran a scan on the old Federation emergency frequencies. No activity. No patrols in range. No response to the beacon she had sent months ago, asking for updates. This part of space had been abandoned, which meant the Varnak thought it was unguarded. She leaned back in her chair. Her hands trembled slightly. This was no coincidence. The enemy wasn't lost. They were scouting, preparing. Alara stood, walked slowly to the viewport, and stared at the dead moon below. She could leave. The small shuttle she kept docked was slow, but it could get her out of the system. She could vanish into the next region, pretend she never saw anything. No one would blame her. But she knew what would happen if the Varnak moved forward. Aurelius Delta was a gateway. From here, they could jump into dozens of lightly defended colonies. Billions of people were at risk. She had once been trained to defend them. Now, she was the only one here. She whispered to herself, of all the systems in the galaxy, why this one? She turned back toward the ship's systems. The Sparrowhawk still had power in its core. Its weapons were old, but she had scavenged some ammunition. The drones were weak, but she could reprogram them. She had time, but not much. Alara keyed the ship's AI interface. Activate emergency systems, she said. Command confirmed, the AI replied in a hollow voice. Status, combat mode inactive. Weapon systems offline. Crew complement, 1. She smiled faintly. Let's change that. The console lit up one section at a time as she began waking systems that hadn't been touched in years. One by one, the old war machine began to stir. Outside the viewport, the stars remained still. But the storm was coming. The lights inside the Sparrowhawk flickered brighter now. Systems long asleep were waking up, slowly, hesitantly, like an old soldier rising after years of rest. The hum of machinery filled the halls. Somewhere deep in the ship, a coolant pump began to cycle again for the first time in a decade. Commander Alara Miles stood at the main operations console, watching green and yellow lights crawl across the screen. The process was slow, and the ship's age showed in every error code and delayed response. But the Sparrowhawk was not dead. Not yet. She tapped into the ship's diagnostics. The main reactor was at 62% capacity, barely enough for combat systems. Shields were offline. Weapons were non-functional. Drone bays were sealed due to power shortages. Life support was stable but stretched thin. The ship was a skeleton, barely holding together. But it was her skeleton, and it was the only line of defense between the Varnak and the rest of the galaxy. Alara pulled up the ship's registry. Once, the Sparrowhawk had been part of the 12th Defense Fleet. It had survived 3 major battles and carried over 300 crew members. Now it was just her, and a handful of repair drones she'd modified to follow her voice commands. She moved quickly through the corridors, her boots clanging against metal floors. She passed empty bunks, long-abandoned mess halls, shattered consoles. Each corner of the ship held memories of lives once lived, crews who had fought, died, or simply left when the war moved on. As she reached engineering, she paused beside an old wall panel. Faded names were engraved there: crew members, commanders, engineers. Her hand brushed the metal surface. These people had held the line once. Now it was her turn. The door to engineering hissed open. The air smelled of oil and dust. Power nodes blinked in uneven rhythm. She knelt beside the main control node and connected a fresh coil to the drone network. "Begin reactivation," she said. "Patch in the utility AI." The AI responded with a soft chime. "Unit designation, Utility Core 1. Status, low function. Awaiting input. Wake up the drones. Start core-level repairs. Prioritize weapons, engines, and shield grid. Ignore crew quarters." "Understood." Around her, small box-shaped drones rolled out of charging ports. Their lights flickered to life. They beeped quietly, scanning the systems and beginning repairs with precision. Alara stood and wiped her hands on her pants. Her body ached. She had been sleeping in a storage room for weeks. Now, there was no time for rest. Back on the bridge, she loaded her personal file into the ship's database. Her old military ID had been stripped years ago, but the Sparrowhawk didn't care. It accepted her code. "Commander Alara Miles," she said clearly. "Temporary authority over all ship systems. Initiate war mode." "Command accepted," the AI said. "Warning, systems degraded. Combat readiness at 23%. It'll have to do." She tapped into the long-range scanner again. The Varnak ship was still out there, cloaked but watching. It hadn't moved closer, not yet. Maybe they were testing the system. Maybe they didn't know she was here. But they would. Soon. Alara walked to the armory. Most of it had been stripped clean, but she found a sidearm, 2 power cells, and a sealed case marked emergency only. Inside was a worn-down command headset and an encrypted signal pad. She slipped the headset on and powered the signal pad. The beacon she had activated earlier was still running, broadcasting a weak emergency message to any Federation ship in range. But the truth was, no one would come. Aurelius Delta was a forgotten system. The Federation had pulled back its forces years ago to protect the inner colonies. Alara was on her own. That night, though time didn't mean much in space, she sat in the dim control room, watching the stars. She thought about the court-martial, about the faces in the tribunal room, about how she had stood there, in her full uniform, explaining why she refused to bomb a civilian outpost. They had called it disobedience. She had called it humanity. Now, she was nothing in their eyes. A footnote. A failure. But here, on this old warship, she had purpose again. The AI chimed suddenly. Enemy scout vessel detected. Closing in. She leaned forward. Range. 70 kilometers. Speed increasing. Alara's eyes narrowed. Let's see what they're made of. She activated the external cameras. The Varnak scout ship appeared, sleek, black, and armed. It was moving straight for the Sparrowhawk. She tapped a command on the console. The drones had just finished repairing one of the magnetic launchers on the lower deck. It wasn't much, but it could be enough for a trap. She rerouted power to the launcher and targeted a cluster of magnetic mines she'd planted in orbit days ago, hoping to sell them later. They were old tech, but deadly in the right hands. She triggered the mines. A silent explosion rippled through the blackness. Sparks, debris, a sudden energy surge. The Varnak ship was caught in it. One wing broke off, spinning into the void. The ship twisted, lost control, and veered off course. It didn't explode, but it didn't continue either. Alara exhaled, long and slow. "One down," she whispered. "More will come." She sat back in her chair and stared at the scanner. It would take hours to repair the launcher. And soon, the Varnak would know they weren't alone. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. She had made her choice. She would stay, fight, defend this system. Not because anyone had asked her to, but because it was right. Far from the forgotten edges of Aurelius Delta, deep in the cold command chamber of the Varnak flagship Vrethzor, Overseer Kelzor studied the holographic map before him. The galaxy glowed in faint red and blue markers. One small system blinked yellow, Aurelius Delta. It was supposed to be abandoned. No active fleets. No defense posts. Easy to claim. But something unexpected had happened. His scout ship, one of his finest, was now dark, disabled, and floating in pieces near the fourth moon. He watched the replay of the ship's final moments, recorded by its black box beacon. The blast pattern, the sudden magnetic pull, clearly a trap. It wasn't a random explosion or drifting minefield. Someone had set that up with purpose. Kelzor narrowed his pale, reptilian eyes. His long, armored fingers tapped the edge of the control panel. Who is interfering? He growled in his native tongue. Who dares stand in my path? His second-in-command, a younger officer named Trelrun, stepped forward carefully. There are no Federation records of any active defense forces in that system. The only known ship left there was the human warship designated Sparrowhawk. It was decommissioned and left in orbit over a decade ago. Kelzor considered this. Then it is either automated, or someone has taken control of it. He smiled faintly, his sharp teeth catching the low light. No matter. One ship cannot hold the line. He turned to the rest of his bridge crew. Send 2 corvettes and a fighter wing. Sweep the system. Destroy the Sparrowhawk, and leave no trace. I want that system under Varnak command before the sun rises again. The order was given. Lights flashed. Engines ignited. The hunt had begun. Back on the Sparrowhawk, Alara stood alone in the ship's tactical chamber. The air was stale, but warm. Screens surrounded her, flickering with data. She watched the distant movement of the enemy fleet. 2 smaller corvettes and at least 5 fighters were moving toward her position. She had bought herself time, but not much. Her drone team had finished patching power to the lower deck. The magnetic launcher was offline again, too damaged to repair. But the mid-deck plasma cannon showed promise. If she rerouted enough energy, she might get a single shot off. She leaned over the console and brought up the power grid. It was a mess. Half the conduits hadn't been touched in years, and there were overload warnings in 3 major junctions. She whispered under her breath, "You're going to fall apart on me, aren't you?" Still, she had no choice. Using the command headset, she spoke to the repair drones. Prioritize plasma relay circuits, mid-deck sector 4A. Lock down non-essential lighting. Life support to minimum. Route remaining power to main weapon. The drones beeped in confirmation and scattered like metal insects through the ship. Alara returned to the bridge. She sat in the pilot's seat, not because she could fly the Sparrowhawk easily, but because it was the best spot to see what was coming. She activated the holographic battle grid. Enemy ships were now just 30 kilometers out. She tapped her fingers on the side of the console. The question wasn't if they would attack. It was how. Would they bombard her from a distance? Would they send an aborting team? Or would they try to disable the ship and take it intact? The Sparrowhawk's AI broke her thoughts. Warning. Incoming transmission detected. Source, Varnak command vessel. Alara raised an eyebrow. Play it. A low, crackling voice echoed through the bridge. This is Overseer Kelzor of the Varnak Empire. Your presence in this system is unauthorized. Surrender the vessel and power down all systems. Resistance will be erased. Alara couldn't help but smile. She leaned forward and pressed the comm button. This is Commander Alara Miles, acting captain of the Federation warship Sparrowhawk. This system is under human protection. Turn around, or be destroyed. There was a pause. Then static. No reply. She didn't expect one. Outside, the enemy ship split formation. One corvette hung back, while the other approached slowly, flanked by the fighters. Alara stood and moved to the targeting console. She entered manual mode and loaded the plasma cannon's targeting systems. It would take 5 seconds to fire once fully charged, an eternity in space combat. She waited, held her breath. The lead fighter moved in fast, too fast. Now, she whispered. She fired. The plasma cannon lit up, shaking the ship with its power. A stream of blue fire streaked into the darkness and hit the fighter dead on. The explosion was bright and silent. The fighters scattered in confusion, breaking formation. Alara wasted no time. She rerouted emergency power to the decoy drones she had stored in the ship's forward cargo bay. They weren't built for combat. but she'd armed them with sharp debris and flares. They launched like bees from a hive, weaving through the enemy lines, confusing sensors. 2 more fighters went down. One collided with a drone, the other struck debris and spun out of control. The corvette fired back, thick beams of energy slicing past the Sparrowhawk. The old ship shuddered as one beam scraped the hull, melting part of the port's side. Alara gritted her teeth. The Sparrowhawk could not take much more. But she wasn't trying to survive forever. She just needed to send a message. This system would not fall quietly. Inside the Varnak command vessel, Kelzor watched the feed. 3 of his ships were gone. 1 corvette damaged. He stared at the screen in silence. Impressive, he said softly. A single ship. 1 mind. But stubbornness is not strength. He turned to his crew. Prepare the main fleet. We will take that ship apart ourselves. Back aboard the Sparrowhawk, Alara limped through the hallway, clutching her side. The last blast had knocked her into a bulkhead. Her ribs ached, and blood trickled from a small cut above her eyebrow. But she was alive, and so was the ship. She sat back at the console, wiped the sweat from her forehead, and looked at the scanner. More ships were coming. But now she knew something important. Kelzor himself was involved. He wanted this system, and she was going to make him regret it. The Sparrowhawk groaned like an old beast awakening to pain. Sparks flew from a ruptured wall panel on the upper deck, and the corridor lights blinked in uneven rhythm. Inside the control room, Commander Alara Miles limped toward the engineering console, one hand pressed to her side. Her uniform was torn, stained with grease and blood, but her eyes were sharp, focused. She had survived the first wave. Now, the real fight was coming. Kelzor was bringing his full attention to Aurelius Delta. The last scan showed a heavy cruiser and 2 destroyers closing in. Their engines glowed bright on the edge of the sensor range. Alara had little time. The plasma cannon was offline. Its last shot had drained too much energy and cracked a major cooling pipe. The magnetic launcher was in pieces. Her shield array was still dead. The Sparrowhawk had weapons, yes, but most of them were scattered across different decks, patched together with parts from abandoned outposts and scrapyards. Nothing was ready for sustained battle. But Alara didn't need sustained battle. She needed to be smart. She sat down at the central command seat and pulled up the full system map. Her eyes moved quickly, tracking every working system. One of the old cargo rails still had operational gravity plating. The mining drones stored in Bay 4 had been stripped of their tools but could still move in 0G. And the asteroid belt just outside the moon's orbit? Still unstable, but full of jagged rock, twisted metal, and fuel pockets. She could use all of it. With a calm voice, she spoke into her headset. Drones, initiate program Ember. Load debris traps to exit vectors Alpha and Delta. Route all power from Deck 6 to engine boosters. Prepare the emergency pods as decoys. Begin sequence. Around the ship, drones scrambled. They carried chunks of broken hull plating and magnetic mines into open space, arranging them in careful clusters. Alara watched the progress on her screen. She didn't plan to meet the Varnak fleet head-on. That would be suicide. She was going to fight them like a shadow, strike fast, vanish, strike again. Kelzor sat in the command chair aboard the Varnak cruiser Threx VA, his golden armor polished, his long fingers resting on the arms of the throne-like seat. He had reviewed the data. The human ship was damaged, primitive, and alone. Yet it had taken out half of his scouting force. He respected cleverness, but he also despised defiance. He turned to his weapons officer. Open fire the moment we cross into orbit. Disable its drive systems. I want it drifting, lifeless and silent. Then I will burn the wreck myself. The officer bowed. As you command, Overseer. The fleet moved in formation, weapons charged. But as they entered orbit, everything went wrong. The first destroyer hit a field of shrapnel. The debris slammed into its hull, magnetized metal plates fused to its outer armor. The ship jerked, spinning off course. Then the mines detonated. A fireball spread across its left flank, disabling its secondary engines. The destroyer tumbled into the path of the second ship. Alara smiled grimly. Target caught. She activated the boosters on the Sparrowhawk. The old ship groaned but moved, darting from behind the moon's shadow and into clear line of sight. She fired 2 bursts from the only functioning railgun, a cobbled-together weapon mounted near the vending systems. One round tore through a Varnak fighter. The second hit the fuel pod of a support drone, which exploded violently, right next to the lead cruiser's bridge. Kelzor stood, steady even as his ship rocked. Find her. I want her engines destroyed. Back on the Sparrowhawk, Alara rerouted power again, cutting life support to the rear deck to give her one final shot. She opened the venting ducts near the starboard thrusters and released a stream of ionized gas. A Varnak torpedo followed the gas trail. She triggered a secondary explosion, once she'd rigged herself using a damaged fuel tank. The explosion lit up the void. The enemy thought she was hit, but she had already slipped below them, hiding once more in the asteroid belt. She used the moments of confusion to activate her last resort, a battered orbital defense platform, long dormant, floating in high orbit. It was Federation tech, older than the war itself, but still armed with basic pulse turrets. She prepared it weeks ago, just in case. Platform control, remote fire mode, she whispered. The turrets activated and opened fire from above, catching the Varnak destroyers in a deadly crossfire. Alara leaned back in her chair, breathing hard. The Sparrowhawk was overheating. The hull had breaches. The core was reaching dangerous temperatures. But she had done it. One destroyer was crippled. Another was retreating. Kelzor's cruiser had been wounded, its bridge scorched, its systems confused. Inside the Threx VA, Kelzor roared in anger. His claws dug into the edge of his throne. She fights like smoke, he spat. She slips through fingers. But fire consumes even smoke. He stared at the star map. He would not make the mistake of underestimating her again. This is no longer a sweep, he declared. This is war. Prepare for boarding. I want that ship broken from the inside. Alara didn't hear his command, but she felt the shift in the scanners. New life signs were appearing. Boarding craft. They were coming. She pulled a damaged rifle from beneath her console and limped toward the lower deck. This wasn't over. Now, they would come into her ship. And she knew every corner, every shadow, every trap. She was not finished. Not yet. The Sparrowhawk shook violently as the boarding pods slammed into her outer hull. The magnetic clamps hissed and locked with a harsh snap, drilling into the ship's plating. Inside, Commander Alara Miles steadied herself against the wall. Her breath was fast, her pulse steady. The time for waiting was over. They were here? She moved through the ship's lower corridor, weapon in hand, lights flickering around her. The rifle was old, Federation-made, and patched together with spare parts. She had tested it twice. It worked, but just barely. She passed the engineering deck, now scorched from power reroutes and overloaded circuits. Her drones, what few remained, were lined up along the walls, waiting in standby mode. She had reprogrammed them for close-quarters combat, nothing advanced, just sharp welding tools and sudden bursts of electricity. Defense protocol, activate, she whispered. The drones beeped and rolled forward into the darkness. Then came the sound. A hiss, followed by a loud thump. The airlock at the mid-deck burst open. Varnak soldiers stepped inside, tall, armored, with narrow glowing visors and jagged rifles. They moved as a unit, silent and brutal. Alara crouched behind a support beam and waited. The lead soldier gave a signal. That's when she struck. She fired a burst of plasma at the first invader. The shot hit center mass, sparking against the armor and sending the creature backward. The drones darted out, shocking two more in rapid zaps of blue light. The corridor exploded in noise, shouts, blasts, sparks. Alara moved fast. She didn't aim to win a firefight. She aimed to stall, to lead them into the traps she had set. She retreated, drawing them deeper into the bowels of the ship. One turn led them through the old cargo lift shaft. There, a pressure plate triggered an overhead pipe to rupture, spilling coolant across the floor. Two Varnak soldiers slipped and fell. She threw a flash charge and darted into a side hatch, leaving them stunned. Her breath came in short bursts. Her ribs throbbed. But she kept moving. The enemy was scattering through the ship, trying to find her, trying to take control. But they didn't know the Sparrowhawk like she did. Every corner, every broken panel, every side vent, she had mapped it, repaired it, lived in it. It wasn't just her ship now. It was her weapon. Kelzor stood at the command platform aboard the Threx VA, staring at the live feed from his boarding party. Progress, he demanded. His second-in-command answered hesitantly. Resistance is fierce. Minimal forces, but strategic. Our men are split across sectors. Kelzor's eyes narrowed. She is bleeding you out, one corridor at a time. No more. He stepped forward. I'm going in. The bridge fell silent. My lord, Trelryn said carefully. Kelzor growled. This ends with me. Prepare my drop pod. Alara reached the central chamber, the old reactor room. It was no longer powering the ship, but she had rewired it into a trap. The floor was laced with explosives. A single shot to the core would tear the deck apart, This was where it had to end. She knelt behind the control console and set the manual override. The detonation would require her handprint and code. No mistakes. No delay. Then she heard it. A heavy impact above her. A hiss. A clawed footstep. Kael'Zor had arrived. He dropped from the upper walkway, landing with terrifying grace. His tall frame glinted with black and gold armor. His eyes burned with cold fury. Alara stood, slowly raising her rifle. Kael'Zor looked at her like one might study a puzzle. "You," he said. "One woman. One ship. And still, you made me bleed. You came here thinking you'd walk through a graveyard," she said. "But this ship remembers how to fight." He stepped closer. "You can't win." "I don't have to," she replied. "I just have to make sure you don't." She fired. Kael'Zor moved faster than she expected. The shot grazed his shoulder. He returned fire with a wrist-mounted blade, slicing the rifle from her hands. It clattered across the floor. They fought hand to hand. Alara ducked, blocked, kicked, punched. Pain shot through her ribs. Kael'Zor struck like a machine, strong and brutal. But she was quick, and she knew the room better than he did. She rolled toward the console and slammed her hand down. The reactor core began to hum. Kael'Zor's eyes widened. "You would destroy yourself?" Alara stood, blood on her lip. "If it means stopping you?" "Yes." But then an idea. She didn't have to die. Not yet. She reached to her belt and triggered her last device, the EMP cannon, salvaged from an old station weeks ago. She hadn't used it yet. She had saved it for this moment. Kael'Zor stepped forward. Alara aimed the small device and fired. A wave of blue light exploded from the cannon. Kael'Zor screamed as his armor locked, his weapon shorted out, and he collapsed, paralyzed. The lights around the reactor dimmed. Alara knelt beside the console and canceled the detonation. She breathed deeply, her hands trembling. Kael'Zor lay motionless, his eyes still burning. "You've lost," she said. "Tell your fleet to retreat, or I finish what I started." The comm device on his wrist buzzed with static. His second-in-command's voice came through. "Overseer, we've lost main support. Enemy reinforcements are inbound." "Reinforcements?" Alara turned to her console. The beacon she had activated days ago, someone had answered. A Federation fleet was entering the system. Too late to fight, but just in time to witness the aftermath. Kael'Zor growled low. "You're one soldier. You delay the war, not end it." "Maybe," Alara said. "But history will remember who stood first." She sat down beside the console, exhausted. Her ship was in ruins, her body broken. But she had done it. She had held the line. Alone. The Sparrowhawk floated in silence once more. Its hull was scorched. One wing was nearly gone. Fires had burned through 2 decks before the remaining drones sealed them off. The lights flickered dimly, systems running on backup power alone. But the ship still held together, just barely, its skeleton battered, its heart still beating. Alara Miles sat in the main control chair, arms resting limp at her sides. Her uniform was torn, stained with blood and ash. The gash over her eyebrow had stopped bleeding, though her vision was still blurry. She breathed slowly, each inhale sharp against her bruised ribs. The bridge was quiet, save for the low hum of the emergency systems. A single Federation frigate now drifted in orbit above the moon, its bright lights casting shadows across the war-torn Sparrowhawk. More ships followed, 5 in total, appearing one after another from hyperspace. Too late for battle. Just in time for history. A voice crackled through the console speaker. "Sparrowhawk, this is the Federation ship Vigilant. We received your distress call. Stand by for medical and engineering support. Confirm your identity and crew count." Alara leaned forward, wincing. She pressed the comm button. "This is Commander Alara Miles," she said, voice hoarse but steady. "Crew count, 1. There was a pause on the line. "1, the voice replied. "You held the line against a Varnak fleet, alone?" Alara glanced around the broken bridge. The damage, the burns, the blood, the memories. "Yes," she said quietly. "Alone, but not unarmed." The Federation officers aboard the Vigilant were still trying to process what she'd done. The reports from the orbital satellites painted a clear picture. Alara had disabled multiple enemy ships, held off boarding parties, and captured Overseer Kael'Zor, one of the most feared Varnak commanders in the outer systems. She had done it with 1 broken warship and a few dozen repair drones. She stood up slowly as a boarding team from the Vigilant arrived through the docking corridor. They were young, fresh uniforms, wide eyes, medkits in hand. They looked around in stunned silence. One of them, a lieutenant, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're here to help." Alara nodded, allowing herself to relax for the first time in days. The team moved quickly, tending to her wounds, inspecting systems, and transferring logs from the ship's database. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. The ship spoke for itself. Later that day, a senior officer, Captain Reeve, came aboard. A tall woman with gray in her hair and steel in her voice. She stood across from Alara in the remains of the command room. "I reviewed your case file," Reeve said. "Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, refused orders at Outer Reach Colony. It was buried deep. Most of command thought you were dead." "I almost was," Alara replied. "A few times." Reeve crossed her arms. "You saved more lives here than you ever endangered out there. I've already spoken with High Command. They're offering reinstatement. Full rank. Command of a new ship." Alara paused. She looked out the cracked viewport at the stars. "I'm honored," she said. "But no." Reeve raised an eyebrow. "No. I'm not going back to command centers and medals. The fight isn't over. The outer systems still need help. Quiet places like this, places people forget they matter. I'll stay out here. Help rebuild. Prepare others." Captain Reeve studied her for a moment. Then, with a small nod, she said, "Then at least let us give you the resources. A crew. Supplies. A better ship." Alara smiled faintly. "Keep the supplies. But I'll stick with this one." She turned and placed a hand gently on the side of the Sparrowhawk's console. "This ship and we've been through enough to understand each other." A week later, the Federation fleet returned to the inner systems, carrying with them footage, reports, and a single powerful message. A forgotten warship had held the line and stopped a Varnak advance that could have cost billions of lives. The story spread quickly. Newsnets replayed it on every channel. The last stand of the Sparrowhawk became a rallying cry across the colonies. Morale surged. Recruitment rose. Even long-retired officers stood to salute when her name was mentioned. And in a quiet corner of space, orbiting a dead moon, Alara remained. She repaired the ship day by day, rewired power lines, calibrated weapons, taught small groups of settlers and scavengers how to defend their outposts. The Sparrowhawk was no longer a graveyard. It was a shield. One ship, one commander, one system saved, and perhaps the beginning of something greater. As she stood once more at the bridge, watching the stars shift, Alara whispered to herself, "Let them come. We'll be ready."